Cool. Right, it is officially 4 o'clock, so we are going to start our panel. Welcome to Unmasking, Autism and ADHD Representation in Anime and Manga. We're Psychandsewcosplay. We allegedly have social media. It exists somewhere.
Alright, so today we're going to be looking at, we noticed that while watching some of the anime, a lot of popular ones or various, there's a lot of characters that are presented that there's not a formal diagnosis of someone who's a part of the ADHD or autism communities that are offered in the actual media, but that they really fit the bill the more you watch them and their antics during the shows. So we wanted to look at some characters that are, through our own watching, characters that we kind of identify with and have said, yes, we feel like this is a character that's a good representation. And we also looked at other forums like Reddit and such to see what other people were talking about, what characters other people thought were a good representation there. So, to start the panel, I will say that neither of us are doctors, psychiatrists, anything formal like that. So this is all just, we looked at information that is used by current practitioners. So a lot of psychiatrists in that utilize the DSM-5 when making diagnosis. That stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. Currently they're on the 5th edition. And often when making a formal diagnosis, which we cannot do because we're not qualified, they look through a number of symptomology and identify if someone meets enough of the criteria to receive a formal diagnosis. For ADHD, the DSM-5 defines it as a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity/impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. And in the DSM-5, they are looking for at least 5 of the various symptomology to be present for diagnosis. On the autism branch, it defines autism as having persistent deficits in each of 3 areas of social communication and interaction, plus at least 2 of 4 types of restricted, repetitive behaviors. Persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts.
The next thing to look at is we did a lot of research into the cultural views of ADHD and autism in Japan. We felt that a lot of this was necessary because it would be easier for you to understand why we'll be discussing characters that don't have an official diagnosis and why there are still so few characters in anime who have an official diagnosis. So with ADHD, it's a lot of times associated with deviancy. There's a social stigma towards the parents of the children with ADHD as not being a good enough parent, and it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that the child has a mental health disorder. There's a higher focus on physiosocial interventions in school and at home instead of any sort of medication. They're also seen as being lazy or disruptive and will frequently be given the hikikomori Japanese term for a shut-in. And then on the other side with autism, you'll see greater community assistance for those living with autism. However, they're less likely to hold jobs if they need more assistance. A lot of times they'll then just be put into group homes. They will frequently live at home with their parents in young adulthood. And then there's a stigma against the parents of those who require more assistance. And there was a sharp increase in autism awareness in Japan from early 2000. So one of the cool things is we did this panel in 2023 last year, and since then there's an organization called Shake Hands that launched in Japan in 2023, and their focus is on having people who have disabilities do animation work in studios because they found that they're uniquely qualified to do animation work because they're really good at hyper-focusing. And it's really nice to see because that's a bit of a shift from American culture, where in American culture we'll try to force people to do jobs they're not uniquely suited for and give them either a personal helper or some sort of like assistance, instead of allowing them to find jobs that suit their disabilities and needs, which I think is something that you're going to find more in Japan, which has a very hardcore work focus and doesn't want assistance in their job force. So it is a little bit of a positive that we're seeing more of this awareness and assistance in their workforce.
Yeah, animation studios, especially those like MAPPA, for anyone who's familiar with Jujutsu Kaisen animation, they definitely need a lot of hardworking people in those kind of industries. Did you want that one? Okay. So, you might not be able to read this on the screen right away. I'll read off some of these. These are some of the diagnostic tools that are listed in the DSM-5. We're going to then look at some of the characters from various anime that we wanted to talk about today. And we're going to approach some of them with some of these different like qualities or factors and see how they relate and how that comes across with each individual character. So for autism diagnostic tools, deficits in social emotional reciprocity, so perhaps abnormal social approaches, a failure of normal back and forth conversation, reduced sharing of interest, emotions, or affect, failure to initiate or respond to social interactions, and then deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction, so poorly integrated in verbal and nonverbal communication, abnormalities in eye contact and body language, deficits in understanding and use of gestures, total lack of facial expressions and nonverbal communication, and then there is also deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships, difficulties adjusting behavior to suit various social contexts, sharing in imaginative plays or making friends, and absence of interest in peers. Moving on to the ADHD side of things on the diagnostic tool, they have defined two primary categories of ADHD. There's a predominantly inattentive presentation. These are those kind of, their head is in the clouds, they're in class, but they're doing absolutely anything but paying attention to the lecture. Some of the qualities that are listed for the inattentive presentation includes fails to give close attention to details or careless mistakes, difficulty sustaining attention, does not appear to listen, struggles to follow through with instructions, difficulty with organization, avoids or dislikes tasks requiring sustained mental effort, loses things, easily distracted, and forgetful in their daily activities. And then there's the predominantly hyperactive / impulsive presentation. These are the kids that never sat still, that always got in trouble for talking, for getting up, all those kind of things. Fidgeting, difficulty remaining seated, runs or climbs excessively, restlessness in adults, difficulty engaging in activities quietly, talks excessively and blurts out answers, difficulty waiting and interrupts others, and acts as though they are driven by a motor. So these are some of the things that we're going to be considering with some of these characters. Now we're going to get into some anime. Of course, these characters are not confirmed to have any diagnosis, but are characters that we wanted to talk about today. I'll start. So, how many people have seen the animated movie Bubble? Yes, very good. It's actually a very visually stunning and fun movie. I liked it a lot more than I expected. One of the main characters, Hibiki, it's a futuristic kind of post-apocalyptic scenario where there's bubbles that, it's kind of, can I see the notes a little better? So, there's a single area within Tokyo that is pretty much uninhabitable by people. But there's a group of people that kind of explore / do like a parkour battle sport called Tokyo Battle Corps that participate in these games in that sphere. And out of all of them, Hibiki is extremely talented at what he does. He's able to kind of hear the intonations of the bubbles, so he knows like exactly where he should go at what time, so that he can proceed effortlessly through these obstacles. However, when he's interacting with others, he typically does not make eye contact, except for one of the other main characters, Uta. He will speak, but he prefers to stay alone and kind of listen to music and keep to himself. When he does respond, it's often short responses or just kind of gestures. He does hyperfixate on the battle core. It is something where he does want to reach the top of the tower. That's something that people have not achieved at that point, so he's really particular about his sport. One thing that they do actually notate within the movie is that he does suffer from an auditory processing disorder. He has trouble filtering out various different noises, so things like conversations can be very overwhelming, especially if there's multiple people talking. Things like outside noise and stuff can make him very uncomfortable and even in pain, which is why he is typically seen wearing his headphones. One of the quotes from the movie, from Hibiki, was, "To tell the truth, since way back, I've been scared of all the city noise. I couldn't understand how anyone could bear it." So his difficulty interacting with his teammates and everyone around him, and also the extreme aversion to large crowds and large amounts of noise. He definitely feels like a character that we can relate to.
And then the next one we're going to look at is Senku Ishigami from Dr. Stone. One of the things that's really trademark of him is that he'll talk in an academic speech pattern that confuses a lot of other people. He really doesn't know how to like even break it down to a more general form of speaking. He's just stuck in that academic speech pattern. He's really picky about food, and a lot of autistic people with autism will have food sensitivities, whether it be texture, taste. He also likes to make really frequently over-exaggerated movements. He also has a special interest with science. That's all he does is science. Anything else that's not science, he just blocks out and just hyperfixates on it. He also will share his knowledge of science with people, whether or not they know what he's talking about, and he won't even notice that they're not interested in what he's saying. He'll just keep going over and over. One of the quotes that we look at him for is, "There's nothing that can't be overcome with science." So that's just the focus of his life and all he can really think about.
Okay, yep, go. So, this one, which, the more I think about it, I'm kind of aging, because I'm like, oh yeah, Death Note's popular, everyone knows that, right? But, thinking that came out in the 2000s, and we're now in the 2020s. Still popular? Okay. Excellent. Alright, apparently it is still relevant even amongst the kids nowadays, so. Alright, so Death Note, a very cat and mouse detective kind of show. The focus we're going to be looking at today is, I combined both L and Nier. Both of them grew up within Whammy House, the same orphanage, and both of them display very similar characteristics, with some differences, of course. But primarily, they both have always acted alone. L has pretty much only relied on Watari his entire life until the Kira case and needing the help of the Japanese police force. And Nier has always kind of acted on his own to the degree that it frustrated other people at the orphanage, like Mello. They are very unorthodox in their measures of trying to solve crimes and do detective work, to the point where they will use others to reach the evidence that they desire. One example, in episode 2 of Death Note, Light observes that there's a news broadcast that they use a stand-in, Lynn R. Taylor, as a stand-in for L, and calling him out, being like, Kira, we know you exist, we will find you and we will bring you to justice, what you're doing is evil. And when Light eliminates this person, L, his response is not like, oh, you just took a human life. His response is, I would be interested to know how you're able to commit these acts, but I don't mind waiting a little bit longer. We'll meet soon. He just allowed someone to die on live TV, and his interest is, how do you do that? So there's a bit of a disconnect of the value of a human life versus the academic interest of how are you doing this. They're both very hyper-fixated and specialized in solving puzzles and crimes, to the point where they stay up. There's I think Matsuda from the task force notes that he's seen L just staring at a screen for like 3 days straight, not sleeping at all. But for him, he is so fixated on figuring out the cure case that he doesn't like notice the signs of his body. He just wants to figure it out. However, both of them share a very unshakable and absolute understanding of what justice is. Even though their means of solving crimes and the way they utilize people to achieve their results, they justify it by saying that it is for the purpose of solving the cure case. What we are doing is for justice, even if they're kind of bending the laws themselves. Let's see. Some other things that they notate within the show. L has his unique sitting posture, which you can see in the picture there. He doesn't really care how other people perceive the way that he sits in public. He mentions that if he doesn't sit that way, it reduces his cognitive abilities by roughly 30%. So they can gawk at him all they want. He's more focused on being able to think the way that he thinks is most appropriate. And then back at the orphanage, there's a scene with Nier and Mello, one of the other kids at Whammy House, where Mello was really emotionally upset. Spoilers for those who haven't seen it. L passes, and Mello is like, oh, this is awful, what are we going to do? And Nier is simply just stacking his dice, or what? No, yeah, he stacks the dice. And he's like, to Nier, it simply meant that L lost, that Kira was the better person. So that development didn't really faze him or shake his resolve, it just was a matter of fact. There's another quote from the series. There is one of the police officers, Aizawa, is thinking about leaving the task force because they mentioned that the Japanese police are officially pulling out from the Kira investigation, and anyone who wishes to remain with him needs to turn in their official police badge and essentially quit their job. Aizawa is unwilling to do that because he has a family at home, and they think, well, Watsuri mentions, L, why are you doing this? You already set a fund aside for these people so that if this happened, they would be taken care of. L responds by saying, I was testing him. I wanted to see what he would choose. And yeah, although that is a very direct way of seeing how dedicated Aizawa was and how important his family was and what other values were, he could have just talked to him about it. Hey, if you have a family you want to take care of, I understand if you leave. He went about it in other ways.
Have any of you guys seen The Pet Girl of Sakurosu? If you haven't, I'd recommend it. It's really cute and funny and entertaining. So this is Machio Shinai. She speaks with a monotone. There's very little tonation to her voice at all. She also has to study subject material to learn about facial expressions because she doesn't understand facial expressions. So she's working on making a manga And a lot of times the people around her wind up being in the manga because she's so unaware of facial expressions that she copies them directly from watching other people's lives. So, for better or for worse, the people that she's living with in the dorms become the characters in the manga. She also has questionable social behavior because she'll just think about changing in front of other people with little to no thought. It doesn't matter whether it's in her room or not. She also needs to be reminded to act basic daily tasks such as getting dressed, eating, going to sleep, because she'll focus so much on her art that she doesn't care about anything else in her life. Her roommates will act out uncomfortable scenes for her in the manga because she just convinces them that it's a good idea, but it's not something you would typically ask as your friends. But to her, she's like, well, it's fine, I need this to happen, so it's acceptable. Even though savant syndrome is not a diagnosis of autism, it is definitely one of the ways that the media likes to represent autistic people, even that's not the majority. So she does have a savant syndrome for art, and she also gives little thoughts to tasks outside of her area of interest. Sometimes just her behavior will make the people around her uncomfortable. A quote from one of her roommates is, "She looked at me with those lucid eyes. She looked otherworldly." Because she's calmly not really focusing on you, even if she's looking at you. So that's a lot of the difference in social behavior and problems with focusing on things.
Another thing with Sheena is at one point she's like, they have a math test, and she's like, I haven't studied math because it's not art. And one of the other main characters is like, you can't just do that, like that's part of life. And she's like, but it's not art. So they go over basic math, and like instantly she's able to pass a practice test because she's like, oh, I just thought of the equations as pictures and just have it all memorized. And they're frustrated because they're like, people don't do that. But very, very talented there.
So this is Sawako, not Sadako, from Kimi Todoke. So one of the things that they focus on for this anime is that she kind of reminds them of the girl from The Ring, because in Japan, the girl's name who comes out of the well is Sadako. So a lot of times instead of saying her name is Sawako, they'll call her Sadako because she has the long hair and she's very pale and tall and skinny. Because of this, she doesn't really have much interactions with people, so she doesn't have social awareness of things. So she doesn't understand a lot of social behavior. We'll also see that once again, she doesn't have any sort of like fluctuation in her voice naturally. It's very monotone, and as she interacts with more people, she's better able to get different tonality. She very rarely makes facial expressions, and when she does make them, they're not they're very minimal. It's not a very exaggerated form that you'll see with a lot of characters in manga and anime. She also will frequently misunderstand other characters' emotions because unless they tell her exactly how they're feeling, she won't understand it. Like, she needs you to spell it out for her, and most of the time the people are like, oh, but you should have just inferred how I felt. And she's like, well, you didn't tell me, so how was I supposed to know? And she'll just be very blunt like that. She'll just tell you exactly how she's feeling, no matter whether it might make other people uncomfortable. A quote from her is, there's no knowing how others are feeling unless you ask them, and your feelings can't get through to others unless you tell them directly. So that's that stereotypical social convention she's just not partaking in, and is like, I need you to be direct and tell me, or I'm just gonna get confused. And that is a majority of the misunderstandings that do happen in this anime and manga, is because people aren't just coming up and saying, hey, I like you, or hey, I think your behavior is cool. They just think she knows.
Good. So this one is another twofer. Science fell in love, so I tried to prove it. The main characters, Yukimura and Himuro, are quite the pair. Both of them, they are highly focused on scientific research to the point where everything that they do needs to be logical, and there needs to be a formula that explains what the situation is or what they're feeling. To the point where Himuro, on the right, she brings up to Yukimura that, hey, by the way, I think I'm in love with you. And his response, instead of just like, oh, really? I feel the same way, is, and your evidence? Typically, that's a confession is not something that you try to like analyze or try to find proof for. You just kind of discuss it and figure it out from there. They are very unaware of social cues. A lot of their, they conduct a lot of research to try to prove their love values for each other. And it creates a lot of awkwardness and discomfort amongst the people around them. However, it is something that they both thoroughly enjoy and that they hyperfixate on. They come up with various different like tests that they can try to like actually visibly show, yes, we are in fact in love. They feel strong emotions, but generally they have trouble expressing it. Often you see them either kind of being either deadpan or just kind of frustrated. And typically they both speak fairly monotone. Very matter of fact, this is what's going on, this is the evidence, this is what's happening. One of the quotes from them, directly from the show, is, by the way, Yukimura, it appears I seem to be in love with you. And then, but first, how exactly does one find love? So, it's just a romantic comedy that takes two people that need empirical data to validate that they have feelings for each other. For those of you who might be interested in watching this, the second season does kind of trail off into uncharacteristic ending of the second season. So just a heads up, it gets a little weird, but that's it there.
Just avoid the last 2 episodes. So this is Psyche Kuso from The Disastrous Life of Psyche K. So a quote from him is, "Good grief, ordinary people sure are a pain." So he just finds interacting with his general classmates, his parents, to just be a lot of trouble. He also prefers a lot of nonverbal forms of communication through like looks or gestures instead of actually communicating with them through words. At the beginning, you'll see that he prefers being alone, doing everything by himself, and likes to keep people at a distance before his classmates start to break down the social walls that he's put up. He rarely has facial expressions as well, and has a very monotone voice. He really likes routines, and coffee jelly is his food focus. So I don't know how many of you have chicken fingers and fries as your food focus? Just me? Okay. But he also doesn't know how to properly express his emotions or show them to other people. And one of the reasons for this is he disses people to hide his psychic abilities, and a lot of this is seen as an allegory for those who have various diagnoses tend to hide them from the general public. A lot of times in media representation, you'll kind of see that supernatural abilities are just an allegory for having some sort of diagnostic disability. I believe it's ADHD.
So now we're going to shift and look at non-diagnosed characters that are accepted as having ADHD. So should we start with we'll start with the self-proclaimed #1 most hyperactive ninja of Konoha. Now, Naruto, I know it's a bit of an unknown show. You might not have heard of it, but you know, there's some good stuff there. Naruto is a very strong poster boy for what some people refer to as main character syndrome as well, where you have a very headstrong main character that disregards what their instructors are saying, what society's saying, and they're so focused on themselves and their friends that they're like, I'm going to be Hokage, I'm going to be the king of pirates, I'm going to do this. And they just push through no matter what the obstacles are, because they just have that hyperfixation on, this is my goal, no one's going to stop me. However, many people with ADHD, even if they're very talented and skilled at very specific skills or activities, they may struggle with things that other people deem as basic. So like, maybe they're extremely good at playing hacky sack, but they can't dance. But people are like, why? You can move your feet, we've seen you do it. I don't know, leave me alone. But Naruto, in the show, he struggles with the basic clone jutsu. It's one of the reasons why he's struggling to even pass the academy so that he can be certified as a genin. However, he is convinced by one of the other characters to steal a Jonin level scroll, and he just teaches himself multi-shadow clone jutsu. This is a jutsu that we only see like 4 or 5 other people use, and he is able to pick it up as a kid, like within like overnight. So he doesn't care about like the basic stuff. He really wants to learn like the Jonin level, like I want to be a Hokage, this is what I need to know. He's also able to master things like Rasengan. He masters it extremely quickly when it's taken others, like I think Jiraiya developed it and took him like years. But he's able to pick that up in a matter of days. One thing that is shown is that he is very impulsive. Even when there's danger in front of him, he often acts without thinking, especially when it comes to saving his friends. The scene in the Forest of Death, or whatever it's called, during the tuning exam, where Orochimaru shows up, is taunting them, and pulls out a giant snake and is about to eat Sasuke. Naruto, despite there being a giant snake that probably should have killed him if he wasn't the main character, jumps in front of the snake to save Sasuke and is like, hey, what's the matter, you scared? As a way to kind of like hype him up and like get him back into the fight. So a lot of people who have ADHD, they see the goal and they don't necessarily look at each step along the way. They just kind of figure it out on the fly once they get there. Another quality, he definitely presents the hyperactive, impulsive side of ADHD, and one of them is like talking impulsively or not being quiet. He's often shouting, and he even has a catchphrase. I was one of the people who looked up the translation for Date Bio, watching the sub. I was like, what does that mean? There is no literal translation. That's just him saying like, believe it, or like, it's just a thing he says. And I'm like, wow, that really is something that his character decided to do. But yeah. Yeah, that's good for him. I can do the next one. Next, I think we'll move on to Yo Sakura from Shaman King. I think the remake of it, I think that's finishing up for anyone who's been watching that. Is that ready? Okay.
Its sequel series is finishing up.
The sequel's, okay, where he has a daughter, is that right? I'm bad at keeping up with anime.
He has a son.
A son. So apparently the sequel is just kind of, it just ends abruptly, and that's it.
That's because in the original manga, the sequel series, the author had like trouble with like the magazine, so he had to switch it to another one to continue it. Okay, that makes sense there. So we're going to focus on Yo here. Yo, one of the first times that he's introduced, one of the main characters, Manta, or Morty if you watch the dub, sees him just in a graveyard by himself, just kind of staring out into the sky. Yo really embodies the inattentive type of
ADHD, where he's just kind of in his own head most of the time. He wants to live an easygoing life, and that is his primary drive on wanting to become Shaman King. He doesn't want absolute power, he doesn't want to do anything that's grand or like changing the world. He just wants everyone to be able to live an easygoing life. There's many times where he's constantly staring off into existence, he's zoned out, perhaps he's listening to music, and he's often very like carefree and like, oh, we'll figure it out, guys, it'll be okay. He even, in becoming Shaman King, even though he has this goal, he's very unable to focus, where he needs Anna, his intended fiancée. She will put him through like trainings from hell, where she forces him to actually take it seriously and develop himself so that he can get to the level that he wants to be at to achieve his goals. The one quote from Yo is, "There's no sense in worrying about something you cannot control, so why bother?" Often he's kind of foiled to Manta, who is an embodiment of anxiety, always kind of freaking out like, oh, what are we going to do? And Yo's just like, we're good. It'll be fine. So, just very carefree, but when he does commit to something, he is very passionate about protecting his friends and all that.
A little throwback to the original Sailor Moon series. So Usagi, or Sailor Moon in the English version, is Serena. Sorry, I forget. But, she's just really impulsive. She frequently speaks out and will get in trouble in class, or she'll just speak out at inappropriate times during the fight with these speeches about friendship and overcoming adversity. I'd like to think she's one of the originals. Friendship is my superpower. She also has a lot of trouble focusing in school when it's a subject that she's not interested in, which is why she's almost always failing English, because she just doesn't care. However, the Sailor V video game, she is able to easily overcome, because all she does is get done with school, go to this game, and play it, and hyperfixate on it until she's able to get to the next level over and over again. She also takes failure and rejection really hard, even when that failure and rejection hasn't really happened, which you will frequently see with rejection-sensitive dysphoria. You don't have to have ADHD to have this, it's just a common comorbid diagnosis. She'll also frequently sleep a lot, doesn't want to study, and would just rather be playing video games. A lot of times we'll look at, like, she's regarded as a crybaby when things don't work out her way, which can be connected back to the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And then she just hyperfixates on Tuxedo Moon and Tuxedo Mask. And when you actually, like, look at it, it's a little kind of creepy in the beginning. Like, she barely knows him, and she's like, this is the man that I'm going to marry. I'm mildly going to stalk him, but it's okay. A quote from her is just, existing is exhausting. So she just struggles to do the general tasks in her daily life that society and her family wants her to do. And she's just like, this is rough. And then our next female character is Katarina Claes from My Next Life as a Villainess. She's just very impulsive in her decision making. She doesn't think through the consequences of her words or actions, which constantly causes her to accidentally make characters fall in love with her around her, even though she's not paying attention to that because she's so focused on food and farming. She's very forgetful and will be easily distracted and just needs to be refocused on any task, whether or not there's danger at hand. She does a lot of excessive fidgeting. She likes to climb trees no matter how much she gets in trouble for it. And she'll just do things on impulse, which others find so charming that she'll drag her friends into problematic things because they're like, well, if she's doing it, I'm gonna go along. A good quote is, aristocratic society is such a pain. So she just doesn't like the general social structure that exists, and she's just gonna do whatever she wants. And you'll actually frequently see with an ADHD diagnosis that school and anything that has too rigid of a structure can sometimes be really hard for that mindset to conform to.
That also goes back to the difficulty with taking on mental tasks that are like overwhelming, where there's the saying that like, oh, I don't have enough spoons to do this. A lot of these characters are just completely out of spoons until someone's like, hey, you want to go fight someone? One character, My Neighbor Seki is a series of short episodes. A lot of these episodes are like 5 minutes long. It's not very deep in like plot or anything. It's really just this kid just doing anything else in class except class. So he'll be doing science experiments, he'll be playing music, he'll be building like Rube Goldberg kind of scenarios, and his other classmates are just like confounded, like, what is he doing? But predominantly inattentive, definitely. Instead of focusing on the lesson, he's very self-absorbed in a variety of hobbies and outrageous activities he does during class instead. He's hyper-focused, and he unintentionally gets his neighbor, Rumi, in trouble because sometimes she'll comment, or sometimes he'll convince her to join in on his hijinks, and then the teacher will notice when she does it. But one of the subtitle for this series is The Master of Killing Time. Some people with ADHD, they're really not interested in the prescribed like activity or function that's going on at the moment, such as classwork or chores at home or tasks at a job. Their mind is somewhere else, especially with the inattentive presentation. They're thinking about like, oh, I want to play that game, or oh, I want to look up more information about this phenomenon, or oh, like, are spiders and crabs related, or something that's completely like not the point at hand. Seki is absorbed in his own world and decides to focus on what he is interested in. And often he will get his classmates in trouble. It's not that he's maliciously doing these actions, but he's just purely inattentive to the people around him. And for this show, I had no idea how to choose one character to focus on, so I just kind of put all three of these blockheads into one picture, because they very much feed each other and showcase very similar behaviors and like mentality towards what they're doing. So the Demon Slayer trio, Zenitsu, Tanjiro, and Inosuke, they're kind of in their own world. They understand that there's demons and stuff going on around them, but the way that they interact with the other Demon Slayers, even people that are Hashira level, who are essentially like authority, they're just very themselves, very like impulsive around them, even though they're supposed to be showing respect or this or that. They constantly, excessive fidgeting is kind of the subtitle for them. Even when they're battered and broken, their ribs are all cracked, they're like, but I need to train. I need to get up and do push-ups and run around and do this and climb on the ceiling and anything. They run about and climb excessively. They are not quiet at all. All the characters, Tanjiro's the quietest. Zenitsu is either like, I'm not talking, or I am literally like screeching at the top of my lungs when a woman's on screen. And Inosuke is just always shouting at whoever he thinks is challenging him. They will blurt out answers before questions have been completed, difficulty waiting turns, act as though they're driven by a motor, so they're definitely checking a lot of these boxes that someone who is making the diagnosis would be looking for. Yeah, I don't think we pulled up a quote from them, But if you just watch an episode where more than one of these characters are on screen, they will constantly feed off of each other back and forth of like, now they're shouting at each other, okay, now they're fighting, okay, now they're going off the train to become better and even stronger. However, when they are in the moment, you'll see moments of hyper-focus. Tanjiro especially, I think of with his sun breathing. At first, it is something that is, he knows it because he's observed it, but he's not really able to fully channel it at first. But then he really is like, I need to figure this out. My dad was onto something. There's something greater here that I alone like know how to do. And he'll really like break that down and try to get better at it so that he can use this like unique strength of his to contribute towards slaying demons and being able to save his sister from being a demon. So season 4 is also here, so definitely looking for a lot more material coming from that.
So now we're actually going to look at media that actually has autistic characters with confirmed diagnoses in them. So we have The First Love and The Last Kill. It's about a young man afflicted with autism who has an uncanny ability to see the details of that normal people don't see, and ends up helping the police in some of their cases. We recently had Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam, and they have one of the first characters in an anime who's actually been diagnosed with autism. Then we have Muchan to te wo tsunade, Jiheisho no musumu ga oshitakureta koto. Pardon me, I only know Spanish and German, not Japanese. And this is about Aya and her husband discovering that their daughter Muchan has autism, and their like experience about how to learn and care for her and grow. Then we have Sazanaka. This story is about a young woman named Tatsuki who, I know it's no longer called Asperger's, it's called autism, but in this manga it's still referred to with old terminology because the DSM-5 didn't exist yet. But it's something that she's not telling her best friend or her boyfriend, and it's about how she chooses to first start unmasking and actually tell them and move forwards in her life so that those people she loves can accept her as well. That's my atypical girl. Yokoi is a manga artist who one day gets a visit from Sato-san, a self-proclaimed fan of Yokoi's work, who made the long journey to meet him. And Yoko quickly realizes that the things Sato-san sees, feels, and thinks about are different from most people. And Saito-san is the one with the autism diagnosis. And then this is actually the first manga that was published in Japan with an autistic character. It's called With the Light, Raising an Autistic Child. And it's just talking about her, like this is based on her actual story about how she felt, because at the time, autism wasn't really an accepted subject in Japan, and how she worked with helping him to become an independent adult and dealing with raising him and everything else when other people didn't understand what this diagnosis was and was still demonizing it.
And there's also some manga that have confirmed characters that are given an official, yes, this character has ADHD. Keep Your Hands Off Aizoken. It's about 3 strangers with a passion for art and animation. They create a club and work towards creating amazing animation. The main character is based off of the high school experiences of the author who is diagnosed with ADHD. So essentially a self-insert where someone who, this is something that I've officially been diagnosed with, has shared their own experiences in a fantastical animation way. My Brain is Different. It's a collection of personal stories about discovering and living with ADHD and other similar comorbidities. Just a collection of short stories, everyday life and struggles of people who may not necessarily fit in with the peers around them. I also do not speak Japanese. Uchi ni wa kuzu Ika de Ichodo. Yeah. It is a manga, a one-shot slice of life manga about living with ADHD. However, for those who also do not know Japanese, it is not yet translated into English, but we wanted to focus on that because it is something where Japan does have that circulated as a representation of ADHD. And then on the right there is Better Man. The plot is an enigmatic Akamatsu Industries, disguised as a heavy machine factory in Tokyo, is a clandestine organization that uses neural-enhanced weapons known as Awakeners to battle a mysterious virus. One of the main characters, Sakura, is confirmed to have ADHD. So we wanted to include these. They're not as well known or circulated into mainstream media, but it is refreshing to see media that explicitly states, yes, this character is, like, this is what I intended this character to be portrayed as. So one reason we wanted to bring this subject up today and present here is it's really nice to see representation of ADHD and autism within media works, whether that be video games or TV shows or whatever, and also good representation, because there are also examples of very cliche or just very poorly fleshed out representation. So representation in media, without a diagnosis being stated, people in the community may not feel as though they're being well represented, leaving them out of inclusivity in media. So there's many characters that, there's some where it may present like a physical disability, like, oh, I'm blind. Like, knowing that you and your personal affliction is being portrayed and that people are like, yes, I like this character, yes, I appreciate what they've done with this, it can be refreshing and kind of validate your own personal experiences.
One of the other reasons why it's important is, how many of you have heard of the Big Bang Theory? So most people in the autistic community will accept Sheldon Cooper as having autism. However, the writer will tell you over and over again, no, he doesn't have autism. I just based it off someone I knew in college and this is how he acted. So even if you have psychologists coming out and saying, yeah, they fit the criteria, like if you don't have that representation and then the writer's like, no, it doesn't exist, how's that going to make the community as a whole feel? So it really is important to actually say it instead of just having to like make guesses and try to find people that you identify with in these TV shows. We can also look, so once Within the Light was published, this actually started to bring more and more awareness of autism to Japan as a whole. And now there's more assistant organizations, there's more organizations to help with job training, and it's slowly like destigmatizing that. What they actually used to do is say that it was the mother's fault that the child had autism because they didn't raise them properly or there was a failing in the genetics. And this manga actually like helped to bring awareness and try to destigmatize that in the population.
So with this presentation, because we only have an hour time slot, there's many other characters represented within mainstream or otherwise media, manga and anime that can definitely fit the bill and can definitely be included in this panel. And should we give it again, we would definitely want to look at if there's other characters that we want to talk about. So with some of the information here and some of the suggestions that we made, perhaps when you're watching shows on your own or reading manga, you might be like, I think this character kind of fits the bill. And also keep in mind that diagnostic tools are available. People who are looking for diagnostic tools, seeking a professional is definitely recommended. Self-diagnosis is biased and incomprehensive at times, so if you or someone you care about is questioning if that's something that they are concerned about, definitely see if you can talk to someone or seek a professional for further directions and instructions. We also, although it might be hard to read on screen, have included a lot of references that we've looked at. A lot of this is referencing the cultural views that we shared that Japan has about the subject of mental health that we discussed about. So there's a number of different scientific articles. You're welcome to come up and take a picture of that if you want to do research on your own. And towards the bottom, there's also some things like chad.org has a lot of information for ADHD specifically, and especially ADHD in adults, which is harder to diagnose because it's not as prevalent, and a lot of medical practitioners are more hesitant to offer diagnosis to adults as opposed to children who they see as more so needing the treatment and instruction that comes with the diagnosis. Anything else you'd like to add? All right. So we are going to start wrapping up so we can clear out here. Again, thank you for coming out to Unmasking, ADHD and Autism Representation in Anime Manga. We hope that you appreciate the things that we showed today. And feel free to bother us a bit as we're packing up, and enjoy the rest of Thy Geekdom. Thank you.